Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric Entertaining Series. Who's Nintendo suing or screwing this week? And we're here today to talk about a meaty lawsuit from Nintendo, pun very much intended for Toad's Burger Head right there. That is because Nintendo is seeking default judgment to the tune of $4.5 million against a moderator of a Switch subreddit that was basically distributing games when they shouldn't have been. And I'm not here to say that person wasn't being a complete moron, they definitely were, and this lawsuit definitely makes a ton of sense. We're going to be talking about what Nintendo is doing here and why they're still making that full court press against emulation and how this is basically part of it. I understand they are still going after Pocket Pair, and we've discussed that on the channel as well, but it's one of those things for everything Nintendo does that people don't really like whatsoever and is very confusing. Sometimes they do end up suing somebody, and you kind of have to understand, well, if you were in Nintendo's position, you would probably have to actually do the exact same thing. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, got a Patreon link down below as well. But you'll see here that Nintendo is suing for $4.5 million, and this is something that we talked about earlier this year on the channel, that Nintendo was trying to find the names and information of two different groups or two different individuals, basically by subpoenaing Reddit and going through and researching all these people's posts to try to, for lack of a better term, reverse engineer who they actually were. And trust me, when Nintendo wants to find something out, or any other corporation wants to find something out, they are going to find everybody, because with the whole Yuzu settlement thing, I said back in 2024 that Nintendo was going to continue to use the court system to punish anyone that they felt was going against their best interest. And as far as Yuzu is concerned, yes, they definitely did some things that weren't too smart, but I still maintain that software emulation is a legal practice. But when we talked about this earlier in the year about these two individuals, you'll see here that they were talking about the fact that they found the name of the person from Arizona, and that they were actually running a couple different subreddits that were advocating for just taking Switch games and running them on hardware without buying them. Now, to say that that is Hall of Fame level first ballot stupid would be an understatement. That's definitely what you don't want to do when you're dealing with Nintendo. And it really isn't surprising that Nintendo is going to go after this person, because basically they continue to try to make contact with them, and they really haven't responded to the court case whatsoever. And at least in this instance, and it's going to be weird for me to defend Nintendo, they did basically say, if you just stop this, we will walk away. They were trying to get him to basically stop all these actions, and they ignored Nintendo's request, and that is absolutely stupid. And what we've seen here with some of these Switch 2 basically soft locks where you can't update the system because you ended up with the wrong used game, Nintendo is out there looking for this stuff. And I did say that in a previous video when Switch 2 is basically coming out, and a lot of people said that you're basically trying to whip up some fear or do some clickbait, but we've seen multiple instances of this exact thing happening. Now apparently, if you do have your receipt, you can call Nintendo, and people have stated that they will reverse some of these basic console bans, but it is still one of those things that's a little bit ridiculous. Sure, Nintendo go after the people that are committing rampant piracy, but maybe not the individual user here. But that really is an interesting thing. Nintendo isn't going to make a delineation whether or not you're a massive pirate like this person here who's being sued, or someone who just bought a used game. And it all comes down to the fact that Nintendo keeps basically banging on this technological prevention measure that they put into the Switch. And it really isn't a decided law, because reverse engineering to basically make sure software is interoperable between different platforms is considered a fair use way to basically work around this encryption. But it hasn't really been settled in a court case fully yet either. So if something like the Switch 2 actually sees any sort of emulation in the future, I think you're going to try to see Nintendo actually bring a court case where they say that emulation isn't legal unless you are the rights holder. That is just my opinion. You can disagree with it down below. Leave me a comment and you tell me what you think Nintendo is going to do in the future, because I don't think they're going to become any friendlier, that is for sure. And as we've gone through some of these other court cases here, they really just always talk about those technological prevention measures, or TPMs, and that's when they wanted the judge to even say in the Yuzu case that violating these or going around them was completely illegal. Now, a judge's statement in a settlement is not binding law whatsoever. It doesn't set precedent, but it does allow Nintendo to point at something for future court cases, especially in civil court, because Nintendo says that they lost 1 million sales for Tears of the Kingdom because it was basically pirated that many times. They just basically see that is 1 million times 70, so think about it as $70 million lost, even though that probably isn't the truth. And I'm really not surprised to hear this court case is still going, because Nintendo is ruthless. But let's think about it this way, because Nintendo did try to contact the person they are suing, they are in the find out stage of the fuck around and find out kind of methodology on how these things unfold. and again, have absolutely no idea when you knew Nintendo was looking at you, why you just didn't basically close up shop, beg forgiveness, and move on with your life, because you are not going to beat Nintendo, especially when you are absolutely in the wrong. And that is the reality, at least on this lawsuit we're talking about today. This person has absolutely no defense. No lawyer is going to argue that what they were doing should be allowed. A lawyer, if they do hire one and actually try to fight the case, would just be looking to settle for the least amount of pain possible. And for the fact that the defendant here isn't even really trying to contact Nintendo, that is why they're doing something like seeking a default judgment, because if you just ignore a court case, it does not just go away. It just means the judge says, well, the defendant didn't want to argue it whatsoever, therefore the plaintiff wins, they get everything they asked for, and that's just basically game, set, match. So it seems like this person knows that they're just in absolutely massive hot water here. But again, the reality is they're not actually going to collect on this $4.5 million. It kind of is just a number that they throw out there when they talk about this person might not have much. And if they have a job, it might be one of those things. Their paycheck might be garnished $50 every 2 weeks. So really, it isn't like Nintendo is going to see this massive amount of cash. But it does show that Nintendo is not screwing around whatsoever. And again, I understand that it is not exactly rampant, but there are instances of Switch 2 basically being soft locked. So you can't update your system, you can't download games, you can't run those key cards if you end up running the wrong software on here. And I explained how that works in a video, but I think this is going to be something that is a problem for Switch 2 moving forward, especially if for any point in time it does get opened up. But if we take a look at the actual lawsuit here, this was filed on the 3rd of October, so basically 4 days ago as of you're seeing this, you'll see that they're basically filing a motion for default judgment. And what that basically means is whatever Nintendo asks for in this document that would be considered legal, they would automatically get because the defendant didn't actually fight the case and that default judgment was entered in. Although I do love how lawyers write these things, they can't just define who Nintendo is, they have to say they're a celebrated Nintendo Switch video game console maker. Some of the language here is just so flowery, you have to wonder what the hell, why they're writing it basically just to pad the hours. But this is the type of thing that isn't helpful either, because for every bad actor out there, there's someone that just uses legal emulation to make games better that you own, and that is the reality of the thing. I own a copy of Super Mario Galaxy and Galaxy 2, so if I want to play them on Dolphin versus buying the new Switch release, that is my right because that emulator is permissible and I own the games. But Nintendo doesn't think that same thing, and if people keep screwing around with this, they're just going to basically go after everything they can get their hands on, because we've already seen them obtain so many different ridiculous patents against stuff like Palworld. You can't really think that Nintendo's going to somehow decide later on, maybe we don't want to go that far with it. But this document basically just outlines what Nintendo's asking for here, and the defendant basically just completely ducked them. He's trying to go through a hole in another galaxy and hope that the problem goes away, but it really is a problem of their own making. This is an unforced error, so it's really hard to feel bad for this person because they basically poked the tiger and now they're screwed. But even in this lawsuit here, Nintendo is again talking about unauthorized copies, those TPM kind of end runs around to make them run, and even end user license agreement being breach of contract between Nintendo and the person that is party to this lawsuit. And that's why I think this is not just being sued because the person definitely was an idiot and deserves something like this in my opinion, because they had it out and they didn't take it. But Nintendo's trying to get more court cases out there, even in civil court, where basically they're getting statements that working around that TPM is not legal whatsoever. Again, it isn't case law, it isn't precedent, but it's going to allow Nintendo to point at all these different decisions they have won for one reason or the other and state to anybody in the future, you can't emulate our games. Because think of it this way, if you have a situation where there is a Switch 2 emulator and you own the games, the emulator hasn't done anything in violation of any laws, Nintendo is still going to try to absolutely beat the ever-loving hell out of the people that made those things, take them in the back alley, make them bite the curb, and leave them for dead, at least legally. So that's kind of what is going on here. Nintendo just wants this language in all of their court cases so they can point to it: breach of contract, violation of terms, unauthorized copies, circumventing the technological prevention measures. This is how they're going to fight emulation in the future, even if what the emulators are doing wouldn't be considered to be illegal, because again, emulation is illegal, but I do still feel like in the next 5 to 10 years, somebody, and Nintendo's definitely the prime candidate for that, is going to try to take a court case out there and basically state state that emulation should only be legal for the people that make the hardware and own the rights to both the hardware and games, because we know Nintendo definitely uses emulation in their own re-releases. The reality is the fans just do it better out there. They make better emulators, they make better performant games out of those emulators, and Nintendo definitely can't keep up. So the easiest thing to do, especially to protect their new release games, is to sue everyone into oblivion. But in this instance, and it is weird for me to say, I agree with Nintendo on this one, because the person being sued for $4.5 million absolutely just should not have been doing anything that they were, because when Nintendo warned this person to stop, it would be the equivalent of Mike Tyson in his prime standing in front of you and saying, if you don't leave the room in 10 seconds, I am going to punch you as hard as I can. And you're thinking, you know what, I could take that punch. This is Chappelle's show when keeping it real goes wrong, and this person's about ready to find out to the tune of $4.5 million. But that's the video. Hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, leave them down below, but I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.